Be informed, be inspired. Join us for the Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond show. Tune in and listen for both modern and ancient wisdom on all things maternity, parenting and sacred women's business, right here on the Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond show.
You're tuned in to Pregnancy Birth Beyond, contemporary conversations where stories, science, traditions and new ideas meet. Our show is coming to you from the studios of Bay FM in Byron Bay and is broadcasting across Australia on the Community Radio Network. You're here with me, Lara Martin and Kimberly Lipschus.
Breastfeeding, a biological norm, whilst natural, is a learnt skill for both mother and baby. Breastfeeding is for many an intrinsic part of the parenting journey, yet it can actually be full of tears and also full of joy. With all the conflicting advice and messages new parents receive, not to mention the newness of parenting, a baby getting off to a good start can actually be quite a challenging journey. However, when it comes to breastfeeding, there are a few essentials to know. In this episode, we're going to discuss the ins and outs of breastfeeding 101.
And our guest for this episode is Samaya Askill, mother of 3 who has breastfed for 12 years, and Samaya also was a breastfeeding counsellor for over 8 years. I want to welcome you to the studio, Samaya.
Thanks, Lara. It's lovely to be here.
So, Samaya, I wanted to just jump straight into it. Why is breastfeeding important?
Breastfeeding is important because we are a carrying species, and it's part of our biological makeup that babies need human milk. That's how our species has survived. So we need touch and cuddles. We need all of our senses stimulated, and breastfeeding does all of that.
Samaya, also we mentioned there in your introduction that you've been breastfeeding for 12 years. So you have 3 children and you've been breastfeeding for 12 years. Can you tell us the math on how that adds up?
Sure. Well, I've got 3 children. I have Sophie, my eldest daughter, and I breastfed her for 3 years. And my son, Louis, I breastfed him for 4 years. And our youngest daughter, Frida, I breastfed her for 5 years, probably 5.5 years, really. Yeah.
And how did you know, because a lot of the messages, cultural messages we receive is we just see newborn babies breastfeeding. You breastfed much beyond that. Can you tell us how that came about for you?
Sure. I don't think I went in intentionally thinking that I would anywhere be a long-term breastfeeder. It wasn't until that I had my first baby, and just to hold her so close and feeding her and seeing how calm and happy and settled she was, how calm and happy I was when she was feeding well. I just felt big closeness to my children when I breastfed them. I felt like I could sort of check them over and make sure that they were all right from, head to toe while they were feeding. And it was also such a great tool. It just meant there was no getting up in the middle of the night for me to try and heat bottles or sterilise. And the thought of that, really, I'm pretty lazy. I just wanted to, if there's an option to lie down, then I would take it. So it was so convenient. It was this perfect food that was heated to the perfect temperature. My nipples were completely sterile. So we could just be out and about, and it just made my life so much easier. And then as they grew older, it just was also really great because if they got hurt, they could instantly have a breastfeed and feel comforted and reassured about the world.
It's really interesting that you say that, because when you travel to the third world, or, it's very common to see women breastfeeding elder children and just sitting there, relaxed, the children are calm, and yet we think of that as an anomaly here in the West. And I mean, I can only think, given what you do, that it's a joyful experience.
One of the things that made me think that I could breastfeed my children as I got older, I remember I was living in Sydney at the time, and I was at a great big shopping centre, and I saw this woman sitting down right in the middle, and she just sat down and breastfed her 3-year-old. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, well then I can do that. And I think by seeing that, not being hidden away in a feeding room or at the back of a cafe with a, shawl over me or another woman, it really empowered me actually to go on and breastfeed anywhere. And so that's why I think it's really important to breastfeed in public, because it's just normal. Babies are hungry or children need comfort or whatever. We should be able to breastfeed them. And that also means that other women, as I did, were inspired and felt a sense of confidence to breastfeed wherever and whenever I wanted to. And the law is in place that you can breastfeed wherever and whenever you want to, so you cannot be discriminated against. And I think that's really important to know.
It's actually something that just, for me, I travelled to the States when I had a 3-month-old. My first son was 3 months old, and I had to breastfeed in toilets with flushes behind me going, and every time the flush would go, I'm sitting on a toilet breastfeeding because there were no places to sit. People were very anti that, and you saying the law, it's a shame that we have to have a law to make that in place, but also it's great as a safeguard, especially given the supply and demand.
Yeah, and the other thing is that when I had my second child, I went to live in Shanghai for a while, and I contacted the La Leche League group that was there because I knew I wanted to be around other breastfeeding mums. And I remember not many women breastfeed publicly in Shanghai, and I remember saying, oh, what am I going to do? And she said, people will look at you more at a crying baby. If you've got them on the boob, they're not going to look at you because they're not crying. And it was so true. And I stood in busy supermarkets in Shanghai breastfeeding, and nobody looked. So I think that's the other thing is, getting those supportive messages from other mothers gave me more confidence to continue my breastfeeding journey.
Your thoughts on breastfeeding in public?
Oh, I think everyone should feel comfortable breastfeeding in public. It's the most natural thing that a woman can ever do.
And your feelings of breastfeeding a 3 or 4-year-old child?
Well, I think that has to be between the mother and the child. It's really difficult for anyone to come in and say, your child's too old to breastfeed. It's such an intimate relationship between the mother and the child, and the mother has to do what she feels is best for the child.
Public, I don't find a problem because I've had 2 children and I'm currently pregnant with my 3rd. So I think if you've got a hungry baby, you need to feed it no matter where you are.
How do you feel about breastfeeding in public?
I feel breastfeeding in public is a really beautiful thing. It's if that's what a woman feels to do, it's totally natural for the baby that needs to be nurtured at the time.
And do you think there's an age limit to breastfeeding?
No, that just depends on the mum's choice. There's no right or wrong in how a woman breastfeeds or when she wants to stop or start. I think it's the woman's own choice. It's her body, it's her baby, and she needs to trust that her intuition is totally suited to her.
So what are your thoughts on breastfeeding in public?
Fine, no problems with it at all.
And do you think there's an age limit to a child breastfeeding?
I think it's personal, really. It's to do with the mum and what she feels comfortable with. I stopped when Fred was 11 months, but that's just personal preference. So I'd had enough. I wanted my body back after a while.
How do you feel about seeing women breastfeed in public?
Yeah, I've got no dramas with it at all. So, yeah, I'm just used to it with friends and my wife obviously doing it. So, yeah, so no issues, yeah.
We're talking about breastfeeding, the joys of breastfeeding, the ins and outs, and everything pretty much to go with that.
I've heard a little rumour that breastfeeding doesn't start where we think it starts, that, when you have a baby, it's like, okay, in the day 1 you can start training for breastfeeding then, but is there something that happens beforehand?
Yeah, there is. Breastfeeding, you can almost say the seeds of breastfeeding are planted in the womb because the placenta contains a placental lactogen, and that lactogen actually flavours the amniotic fluid. So when babies are in the womb, they're drinking that fluid, and they drink it and they pee it out. That's how they make more fluid. And they're getting the taste of that placental lactogen. So when the baby's born and then the placenta comes away, and those placental lactogens are then released through the body. And basically it tells the body, placenta tells the body, I'm finished my work, breasts, you're on now. And so the baby's born, and that's why babies can crawl up to the breast, because they can smell the milk. They smell that placental lactogen, that hormone that's been released. So they use their eyesight to see the nipple as the target, and their sense of smell. And so when then your breasts get the message that, oh, okay, I'm on now. I've got to produce the milk to take over the nurturing of the baby. And a few things happen in the body. And one of the most interesting things that happens is that the B cells that normally live in our intestine are the cells that carry all the memory of every bacteria or virus that we've ever had and built immunity to. Those cells physically relocate up into the breasts so that then they will be provided live through the breast milk to the baby to give them protection.
Absolutely incredible. There's so many things out of that you can pull. But to start with, the fact that this all happens before the baby. So while I'm sitting there nesting and making my little cupboards or going to work, all this is going on, and my baby inside my womb, I'm not pregnant, but I'm assuming I was, is actually having flavoured milk.
Or flavoured water. But it is, and it's happening. And that those B cells, that immunity, because they don't really know why babies are born with such a rudimentary immune system. And the only theory that scientists have come up with is that basically Mother Nature has said, well, I've got 9 months to grow this baby, and you've got to grow a body and bones and organs. And, well, we don't really have time to develop that immune system, so your mother can provide that for you for the first few months of your life, which is one of the most fascinating for me. And then the other thing is that, once it's really important to get a good connection with your baby, and that attachment, that skin-to-skin contact immediately at birth is also such a big, important factor for breastfeeding. And babies, go right on the mum's chest, and they smell the milk and hear mummy's heartbeat that they've been hearing for 9 months. And then your body's producing the colostrum, which is the first milk.
So can you tell us a bit more about the colostrum and just what those first few days are like, even when milk, the letdown, and when milk comes in and all of that, information?
Yeah. So the first milk is called colostrum, and, a lot of breastfeeding experts often call it liquid gold because it's almost like a natural, pure antibiotic that's so rich in vitamins and minerals. And when babies attach at the breast, that's the first milk that they will have, and it's quite a different colour. It almost has a golden tinge to it. So it's really important that babies get a really great attachment for their first feeds, and that's often by mums being really comfortable. That can also depend on how the birth's been, if it's been a really positive birth or if it might have been quite stressful. So, some mums are really physically uncomfortable. So, it's important to know for those, and for, any support or medical staff around a mum for her first breastfeed, that mum really needs to be as comfortable as she can be and as unstressed as she can be. Because we know that there is a letdown reflex that happens, and that's when babies attach at the breast. They stimulate nerve endings in the nipple, which sends messages to the brain to release 2 hormones. One is prolactin, and that stimulates the milk-making tissues, and the second hormone is oxytocin, and that is the